Quadratic equation is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0 is called standard form. Okay, from the equation, we have a, b, and c. So a, b, and c are elements of real number, and a is not equal to 0. From ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, why a is not equal to 0? Now, if a is equal to 0, so we are going to substitute a by 0, so we will have 0 times x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So multiply 0 by x squared, so the resulting is 0 plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now, adding 0 to bx, that will be 0 plus bx is bx. So plus c is equal to 0. Now, the resulting equation is bx plus c is equal to 0, where the exponent of x is 1. So if the highest exponent of the equation is 1, it is not called quadratic equation. Instead, this is now called linear equation. So from here, we can say that a must not be equal to 0. In our standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, so we have 3 terms. So we have, this is the first one, first term, second term, and our third term. So our first term, ax squared, this is called quadratic term. And our second term, bx, this is called linear term. And our c, the third term, is called constant. Also, from our standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, so we have a, b, and c. So a, b, and c, these are called coefficients. Example, the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. So this quadratic equation has 1, 2, 3 terms. 1, 2, 3 terms. Now, which of these terms is our quadratic term? So, the quadratic term is our first term, which is 2x squared. So, the quadratic term is 2x squared. How about our linear term? So, linear term is our second term. So, as you can see, so we have 5x. And the sign in front of 5x is negative. So, meaning, our linear term, you will get the negative sign for the linear term. So, we'll have negative 5x. Okay. And for our constant term is our third term. So, the constant term is positive 6 or 6. Okay, now, what are the coefficients? So, we have a, b, and c. So, coefficient a is 2. Coefficient b is negative 5. And coefficient c, or the constant, is 6. other forms of quadratic equations. Before, we have our standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So ngayon, we are going to solve the other forms. So I have listed 3 forms or 3 situations wherein if b is equal to 0, number 2, if c is equal to 0, and number 3, if b is equal to 0 and c is equal to 0. So what will happen to our standard form in these cases? So let's have the number 1. So if b is equal to 0, so from ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So we are going to substitute b is equal to 0. So here, we will change b to 0. So this will become a x squared plus 0 times x plus c is equal to 0. So we have to multiply 0 and x. So we have ax squared. What is 0 times x? That is 0 plus 0. So plus c is equal to 0. So adding 0 to the equation, that will become ax squared plus c is equal to 0. So the resulting equation will be our second form. So this will happen if our b is equal to 0. So we will have a x squared plus c is equal to 0. How about if c is equal to 0 for number 2? So if c is equal to 0, so we will have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. C will be 0, so that will become ax squared plus bx plus 0 is equal to 0. Then adding 0 to this term will be ax squared plus bx equals 0. So this will happen if in a standard form c is equal to 0. So that will become ax squared plus bx is equal to 0. Then for number 3, if b is equal to 0 and c is equal to 0, so what will be the form of our quadratic equation? So we will have a x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. b is equal to 0 and c is equal to 0. So that will become a x squared plus 0x plus 0 is equal to 0. So a x squared 0 times x, so that is 0 plus 0 is equal to 0. So the remaining will be ax squared plus 0 is ax squared equals 0. So this will happen if our b and c is equal to 0. So we'll have ax squared equals 0. As you can see, these three are still a quadratic equation because the highest exponent is 2. So we have ax squared. Now, how many terms do we have for the first one? Ax squared plus c is equal to 0. So we have 2 terms. And what are those 2 terms? So we have quadratic term and constant term. How about for number 2? Ax squared plus bx equals 0. So we have 2 terms. So we have quadratic term and we have linear term. So we don't have constant. And last one, for number 3, ax squared is equal to 0. So we have how many terms? We have 1 term only. And that is only the quadratic term. Examples for the form ax squared plus c is equal to 0. So I have given here two examples. So the first one, x squared plus 7 is equal to 0. And for the second one, 3x squared minus 10 is equal to 0. Now, we are going to identify which is our quadratic term. So for our quadratic term, for our linear term, and for our constant term, we also need to identify A, B, and C. Okay? So for the first one, x squared plus 7 is equal to 0. So x squared here is our quadratic term. X squared. Now, do we have our linear term here? So from our quadratic equation, linear term is bx. So since we don't have bx, so we don't have linear term. So we are going to write none. Then for our constant term, so we have 7. Okay. Then for the coefficient, what is the coefficient in our quadratic term? So x squared. So always remember that if there is only a variable, the partner number of x squared is 1. Then we don't have linear term for b, so we have 0. And for our constant, we have 7. Okay, how about for number 2? So we have to identify our quadratic term, our linear term, our constant term. The coefficients A, B, and C. Okay, for the constant term, so we have 3x squared. Then how about for our linear term? So wala yung bx, so there is none. How about for the constant term? So the sign in front of 10 is negative. So our constant term is negative 10. And for our coefficients, so for the quadratic term, for A, that is 3. For our linear term, that is 0. And for our constant term, C, that is negative 10. Quadratic examples in the form of ax squared plus bx equals 0. So I have here two examples. Number 1, 5x squared plus 8x equals 0. And number 2, x squared minus 2x equals 0. So for the first one, so let's identify the quadratic term. So 5x squared plus 8x equals 0. So our first term will be our quadratic term, that is 5x squared. Then for our linear term, so we have bx. So we have 8x. So we have 8x. And for our constant, do we have constant term here? So we don't have constant term, so meaning it is 0. Now for the coefficients, so for our quadratic term, 5x squared, so this is our a, 5. Then 8 will be our a, will be our b, and c will be 0. So for the first one, 5x squared plus 8x equals 0. The quadratic term is 5x squared, linear term is 8x, constant term is 0. Coefficients A is 5, B is 8, C is 0. For number 2, our quadratic term will be x squared. Our linear term will be, instead of 2x, we have to get the sign in front of the term, so which is negative. So that will become negative 2x. And as you can see, we don't have the constant term. So constant term will be 0. Now, for our coefficient, if it is only an x squared, our multiplier here is 1. So the value of a is 1. Okay. Then how about for our b, coefficient b? So we have negative 2. And for our constant will be 0. Quadratic equation examples in the form of ax squared equals 0. So I have again two examples. So we have 10x squared. And number 2 is negative 3x squared equals 0. Okay, so for our quadratic term, for number 1, so we have 10x squared. Always remember that the quadratic term is with the highest exponent or with the highest 2 exponent or second degree exponent. Then, do we have a linear term and constant term here? So we don't have, so we can write none or we can have 0. Okay, then for the value of coefficients, our a, always remember, a is the number or the numerical coefficient with the highest exponent. So the number coefficient or numerical coefficient here is 10 for a. Then our b, so we don't have linear and constant terms, so both of this is 0. And for number 2, so we have negative 3x squared equals 0. Our quadratic term will be negative 3x squared. We don't have the linear term. We don't have the constant term. Okay, and for our coefficients, so we have a will be negative 3, b will be 0, and c is also 0. Directions. Rewrite the following equation in standard form. Give the quadratic term, linear term, and constant term. Also, give the value of the coefficients a, b, and c. For number 1, we have here x times the quantity of x plus 3 quantity is equal to 0. Kung makikita nyo, meron tayong monomial, isang term, at meron tayong binomial. So, kapag ganito ang given, gagamitin natin ang distributive property of multiplication. Distributive property of multiplication. So, paano yun ginagawa? So, we have here, mumultiply natin ang x sa x. So, x. So, we have x times x. Then, ano ang ating sign? Positive. Plus. Okay. Then, x, doon naman sa 3. So, x times 3, then equal to 0. Then, let's multiply. X times x, so we have x squared. Plus, x times 3, we have 3x. Uunahin ang number bago ang variable. Then, equals 0. Ang tanong, ito ba ay nasa standard form na a, x squared, plus bx, plus c is equal to 0? Ang sagot, yes, nasa standard form na yan. Wala lang siyang constant. So, meaning, ang ating quadratic term ay x squared. Ang ating linear term ay 3x. At ang ating constant term ay 0. Ano ang value ng ating a, b, at c? So, meron tayo sa a, since x squared, ang laging kasama na number kapag variable lang ay 1. Then, linear term, we have 3. And constant term, we have 0. Para sa number 2, ang given natin ay the quantity ng x plus 3 times the quantity x minus 2 is equal to 0. So, kung ating titingnan ang ating given, so meron tayong binomial, we have 2 terms, at meron din tayong another binomial, another 2 terms. So, kapag ganito naman ang given, ang gagamitin natin ay yung tinatawag na FOIL method. So, ang FOIL method ay tinuro na sa inyo nung kayo ay nasa grade 8. So, paano ba ginagamit ang FOIL method? So, kaya siya tinawag na FOIL, that is first, outside, inner, and last term. So, F muna tayo para sa FOIL method. F. Alin ang ating F? Yung first term to first term. So, x times x. So we have x times x. Then, we have plus. So we have the outer term, yung nasa labas, x and negative 2. So we have this one. Okay? So we have x times negative 2. So this is our O. Then, ang ating inner sign is positive. So plus 3, this one, times x. That is I. Then for our L, the last term, so we have positive 3 times negative 2. So that is equal to 0. So kaya siya tinawag na FOIL method. Now, let's multiply. So we have x times x squared. Then x times negative 2, negative 2x. 3 times x, 3x. Positive 3 times negative 2, negative 6 equals 0. So kung mapapansin nyo, meron pa tayo ditong common terms. So we have negative 2x plus 3x. So kung pagsasamahin natin itong dalawang to, we have negative 2, then positive 3, meron ka na lang matitira na isa. So magiging siyang x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to 0. So, ang tanong, siya ba ay nasa standard form na ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0? Ang sagot, yes. Nasa standard form na siya. So, kanina, gamit ang FOIL, we come up with the answer, x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to 0. So, identify natin ang kanyang quadratic term. Linear term, constant term. Ang kanyang A, kanyang B, at kanyang C. So, our quadratic term will be the first term, which is x squared. Ang ating linear term ay x, the second term, at ang ating constant ay negative 6. So, for the value of our coefficients, so again, variable lamang ang mga ito. So, ang kasama nilang number kapag ganyan ay laging 1. So, A is 1, B is 1, and our constant is negative 6. Number 3. Ang ating given ay x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 2x minus 5. Kung ating i-inspect ang ating given, wala tayong parenthesis, walang multiplication na ating gagawin. So, ang gagawin lang natin, isusulat siya into standard form na a x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Tingnan natin yung ating right term, dapat siya ay 0 lang. So, papaano magiging 0 yung right term na 2x minus 5? So, ang ating concept na gagamitin dito ay addition property of equality at saka yung kanyang additive inverse. Okay, so paano yun ginagawa? So isusulat muna ulit natin yung nasa left side, which is x squared plus 5x plus 3. So maglalagay ako ng spaces or space dito equals 2x minus 5. Ngayon, kukuhanin natin ang additive inverse ng positive 2x. Ano ang positive or additive inverse ng 2x? So, kung ito'y positive, ang additive inverse niya ay negative. So, negative 2x. So, negative 2x. Kung ano ang ginawa sa right side, yun din ang gagawin sa left side using addition property of equality. So, gaglagyan natin siya ng minus 2x. Then, another one, negative 5. So, ano ang additive inverse ng negative 5? Kung ito ay negative, ang additive inverse niya ay positive 5. So, ginawa sa right side, gagawin din sa left side. Plus 5. Okay. So, ngayon, tingnan muna natin yung right side. Okay? So, sa ating right side, meron tayong 2x at meron tayong minus 2x. So, 2x minus 2x, that is cancelled. Okay? The negative 5 plus 5 will also be cancelled. So, ano na lang natira sa ating right side? That is 0. Then, dito naman tayo sa ating left side, common term. Okay? So, x squared plus 5x minus 2x, then plus 3 plus 5. Then simplifying our common term, so we have x squared plus, what is 5 minus 2? 3x. What is 3 plus 5? 8. Equals 0. So this is our standard form of the given equation for number 3. Now, let's identify what is our quadratic term, linear term, constant term. We have our A, B, and C. So, quadratic term, x squared, linear term, 3x, then constant is 8. So, our A, variable lang siya. Ang kasama niya ay 1. Then, 3x. Our B is 3. And our C is 8.